With 25 games left this NBA season, here are 10 questions on my mind. Number one, am I a dumbass for suggesting the Warriors should blow it up? They've been great, 5-1 in the Jimmy Butler era so far. Butler's averaging a very Jimmy Butler stat line, 20 points, 5.7 boards, 5.5 assists. Very typical numbers from him. He's shooting 9 of 17 from the post and using isolations wide open at the rim on virtually every attempt with all the spacing that he's been provided. In Golden State, they're just like instant chemistry. It's working immediately. Butler, Curry, Draymond outscoring opponents by 2.1 points per 100 possessions. The Butler-Draymond lineup without Steph outscoring teams by 49 points per 100 possessions. A small sample size, of course, only 6 games, but their chemistry so far, Draymond finding Butler over the top with cuts to the rim. Those guys defensively, what Butler has added. He looks tremendous defensively, a big upgrade from Andrew Wiggins on the ball, who was good, but not great like Butler's been. And then in the lineups with just Butler, plus 12.5 net rating. That's the difference here. Finally having a star next to Steph and Curry. They don't need Steph on the floor to look competent. And Steph himself, he looks rejuvenated. Watching from the bench or on the floor, he doesn't look like he has a knee issue anymore. It's almost like he was quiet quitting before, whereas at this point, he's looking great. Pod's playing out of his mind. Moody's been better. The team just feels like it makes more sense. And so back earlier in the season when they were struggling, Steph was hurt, Draymond was hurt. They're talking about not trading their future picks. I suggested maybe you blow it up. Maybe you go the Celtics route, trading Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett and get a ton of picks, tank out the year, go for Cooper Flagg, go for AJ DiBonta next year, and then build again. Maybe I am a dumbass for suggesting that, but I'm not totally sold on the Warriors yet. I'm not totally sold. They're 5-1 with Butler, 1-1 against the Mavericks. They lost one of those games. They've beaten the Bulls, the Bucks without Giannis, the Kings, who have not been good since the deadline, and they beat the Rockets on the final game before the All-Star break. Houston, a young team, they've been closer to average in recent weeks. So they haven't really beaten anybody yet. So I'm not saying like the Warriors are back. They're suddenly a contender, but it's undeniable that a team with Steph, a team with Butler, who's dragged 2 teams to the finals, a team with Draymond, who's still great defensively. It's undeniable that there's something here. And then 25 games remaining, they have one of the easiest schedules in the NBA with their opponent win percentage of 48.3. So they should be racking up a lot of wins. Maybe they move up to the 6th seed. We'll see how this plays out. Golden State's got a chance, a solid chance, but they're still not the favorites. Number 2, will small ball actually become a Lakers advantage? This thought has come to mind a lot ever since the deadline, but especially after Saturday night when they beat the Nuggets on offense. They look tremendous with their spacing. They're bringing Jokic out to the perimeter over and over again, getting easier shots at the rim, cutters going there, open driving lanes. And then on defense, that's where the game plan was really fascinating to watch because Jokic, we know what he can do in single coverage. We know what he can do when he's double teamed. But the Lakers took that to great extremes. They were fronting him on the post, denying him the ball when he didn't have it in his hands. On the ball, they were sending 2 at him, 3 at him sometimes. And I looked up the stats for this. According to Synergy, he had 132 touches in that game on Saturday against the Lakers. He was doubled 40 times. That's the most in his entire career. He was doubled 30% of the time he touched the ball. That's the most in his entire career. Think about that. That includes playoffs. That includes regular season. That includes the finals. That includes past battles against the Lakers. And then on Saturday, JJ Redick with his game plan, he took it to great extremes, doubling and sometimes tripling, denying and fronting. And then on offense, just constantly involving him, pulling him away from the paint. I thought it worked. It looked tremendous. And then you think about, could their small ball actually be an advantage for them? Luka looked great against the Nuggets, his best game with the Lakers. LeBron's still LeBron. Their role players, Reeves, Rui Hachimura, all these guys, the depth they have, Vanderbilt with his pressure on the ball and his versatility, Dorian Finney-Smith. Is it possible that the Lakers use this to their advantage and make a deep playoff run? They're number 1 in defensive rating since January 14th with 107.8 defensive rating. That's 18 games total. AD played in only 7 of those. Then he had his injury. Since then, the Lakers are number 2 in defensive rating. So without AD, Since he got hurt and then, of course, got traded, they're number 2 in defensive rating. Just something to note. Small sample, middle of the season, but something to note. Question number 3 on my mind. This is keeping me up a lot because I'm thinking about who are these teams that could actually knock off OKC in the Western Conference. Can Ja Morant find himself in this new look Grizzlies offense? A couple months back, Thinking Basketball made an awesome video detailing how Memphis is running by far the fewest pick and rolls and dribble handoffs in the entire NBA, like historically low levels compared to the league average. And that has continued on throughout the season. And Ja Morant's role on the offense has been diminished. You look at his stats throughout his history, he always averages over 30 pick and rolls run per game. That's down to 18 this season. Pick and roll has been the primary source of Ja's production. Downhill attacking with Steven Adams as a screener. Now he's got Zach Edey and Jaren Jackson Jr., of course, but he's running about half the amount of pick and rolls that he did prior. Is Ja lost in this situation? He's not shooting the ball well. He's not finishing as well as he has in the past. It feels like he gets lost in this offense a lot of the time. His role has been diminished. His importance has been diminished. And maybe that's by design. Maybe Memphis is doing this because they know they need another layer, that they can't just rely on a Ja-centric 50 pick and rolls a game in the postseason in order to have great success. But I still think, despite that, and it's working, it looks good. Everything looks good. Like Jalen Wells is looking like a Rookie of the Year candidate in this system. Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. has been the best player for Memphis. I think he looks like an all-NBA guy right now. He's blossomed. The Grizzlies look like they have everything, but they still need Ja Morant to look like Ja Morant, and right now he doesn't. And I have a hard time viewing them as like a true, serious contender, like major contender, unless Ja starts looking like the true Ja Morant that we know he can be by the end of the season. So that's the biggest question I have for the Grizzlies. Next up, I need some help to talk about this one, about the Phoenix Suns. Are they really about to miss the play-in? So I brought on my friend John Gambadoro, great radio host based in Phoenix. Now joining me is John Gambadoro from Arizona Sports 98.7 FM in Phoenix. Gambo, how you doing today, man?
Kevin, you always come on my show, so I'm glad to return the favor and come on yours.
I appreciate you joining me today. So I want to talk about the Phoenix Suns, of course, currently the 11th seed in the Western Conference. And with them, you look at their upcoming schedule, 25 games remaining, by far the toughest schedule in the NBA, 55.9 opponent win percentage in the league. They have 2 games against the Celtics, Grizzlies, Bucks, Rockets, Wolves, and Kings. They face the Clippers on national TV, so Kawhi should play that game. They face the Mavericks the week 80 could return. They got games against the Nuggets, the Lakers, the Knicks, the Cavs, and the Thunder. Are the Suns really about to miss the play-in, Gambo?
Probably. I mean, if you can't beat Toronto without their starting center and without Brandon Ingram, you can't beat Toronto. You can't beat Charlotte. You can't beat Detroit. You can't beat Atlanta. You lose 2 games in a row to the Portland Trailblazers. Portland, I don't know how we think, here we just don't think that this team's going to make it. Now, the one opportunity to me would be if Sacramento falls off and struggles. It's not that can the Phoenix Suns play better than some of these other teams. They can't. But it's Sacramento may play worse than the Phoenix Suns, which might allow Phoenix to sneak in to that final spot. Now, I don't think the Spurs are going to be able to catch Phoenix, although the Spurs did beat them. But I just don't know without Wembanyama if they can win enough. But probably Sacramento, Phoenix, San Antonio for one spot.
Yes. I mean, look, the sad thing here is we're talking about the Suns with a $450 million payroll, right, including the luxury tax, talking about can they get the 10 seed?
Kevin, it gets worse than that. It gets worse than that. We're talking about the Suns being in the draft lottery and having that pick go to the Houston Rockets, who go play tankathon, man. Sometimes you'll come up with Houston with a number 1 or number 3 pick. Can you imagine the Suns giving their pick to the Houston Rockets and then them ending up with maybe the 3rd pick in the draft?
It's a nightmare. It really is a nightmare. Like I think even when they made all these trades, they get KD. When they traded away Ayton and they get Nurkic back and that deal, they traded Kamara, who ends up arguably the best player in that deal.
Terrific player.
Even when all of that happened, I don't think anybody would have anticipated Phoenix to be in this spot
No.
at this point right now. And that's where you look at, like you said, the standings. They're currently in the lottery where Houston could get that pick, and who knows if they move up. And then with the Suns, even if they get the 10, I have no faith that they're going to win 2 games to get into the playoffs. Because right now, if they're with a 10, Minnesota's the 7 seed, Dallas is the 8, the Warriors are the 9, and then the Suns are the 10. Like, you're telling me they're going to beat Golden State and then the loser of the Minnesota-Dallas game, like an 80s playing for Dallas? They're still tough. I have no faith. No faith.
This is why they were so desperate to get Jimmy Butler. And they would have given up Durant in that deal to get Butler because they couldn't move Beal. Originally, in early December, they wanted to find a way to move Beal and get Butler here with Durant and Booker. But when they couldn't, they pivoted, and they were willing to trade Durant to get Butler. Not that Jimmy Butler's a better player, because nobody's going to say he's a better player than Kevin Durant, but he's a better fit. He's a better fit. He's the alpha male. He's the leader, the rebounds, the assists. All the KD is one of the great scorers we've ever seen. And I admire his ability to score. But the big question with KD is he a winning player? Is he a winning player? He's a great player. Nobody denies it. But is he a winning player? There was a feeling here that Butler would be a better fit for what the Suns needed. Not a better player, but a better fit. And we're seeing that in Golden State right now with how he's playing.
And I think for Phoenix, before the deadline, I made a post online about how, Butler could be a better fit for Phoenix, and KD, Butler offers a different style. I think that was the phrasing that I used. A different texture to that offense he could add. Half his shots come at the rim. KD's a perimeter-based player. The Suns are lacking at-rim chances. Butler adds that. And that's what we're seeing in Golden State, as you said, with Butler, what he's adding there. The Warriors are near the bottom of the league in at-rim attempts. Butler is somebody who helps there as a cutter, as a driver, all of those things. And with Phoenix, that's why they would have been willing to do that with KD. Not to mention, KD is not the same level defender he was at his peak with his years in the Thunder, his years with the Warriors when he's playing the 5. He's anchoring an elite defense with or without Draymond on the floor. I think the Suns would love to be able to use KD at the 5 this season, but he has not proven anytime they've done that he's able to do that. That's why they still have Mason Plumlee playing this. That's why they had to go get Nick Richards. That's why they were relying at certain times on Nurkic. Why they drafted Agudelo in the second round. Like, Oso's a good player. I think he should be playing over Plumlee, but they can't go KD at the 5. And that's one of the limitations with KD. And ultimately, you nailed it though, Gambo. The leadership aspect. That's what I look at with the Suns team. And I see them losing to Charlotte and I see them losing to Toronto. I'm like, where is the leadership from KD and Book and these guys who are these awesome players? It just feels like they don't have any of it. And that's the missing piece really from their star players.
When Chris was here, he dragged guys into being great players. Chris Paul dragged DeAndre Ayton into being a really good player and helped him get a max contract. KD operates individually of the team. Great player, but he operates individually of the team. Booker's not a leader. So they're lacking that. When Monty was here, you had Jay Crowder. Jay was a leader. You had Chris was a leader. They're lacking that. When they lost to the Spurs the other day, Durant kind of yelling at Bud, we got to get out somebody out here who could guard. You're making $60 million a year. You go back and help on defense. You'll see a lot of times, KD, something happens, he turns the ball over, he doesn't hustle back. And again, I don't want to knock KD too much because he's a great player, but this team is terrible defensively, so bad defensively. The Raptors are not even a good three-point shooting team. And if you go look at the 6, that I charted this last night, the final 5 minutes of the game, they knocked down 6 straight threes. 5 of them completely uncontested. 5. Only 1 was contested. Book got very close to, I think it was R.J. Barrett. Everything else was just wide open. They don't defend very well. They can score, but they don't defend well. I don't blame them for going to get KD. I was not in favor of the KD trade. When they originally tried to get Kevin Durant under the previous ownership, they were willing to give the Nets one of the two. You could have Mikal and Cam and Jay, but not the picks. Or we keep these players and you can have all of our picks. Matt comes in. This organization's never won a championship, so I don't blame him. Trying to win. Kevin Durant's still in his prime. You give up the picks, you give up the players. But then the problem was you doubled down on Beal, and you gave up a lot of picks in the Beal trade. And you could have done Chris Paul for Jordan Poole. Not that Poole's any better than Beal, but at least he didn't have a no-trade clause in his contract. And then you make the Nurkic trade for DeAndre Ayton. And as you mentioned, best player in that deal ends up being Toumani Camara. So you go KD, then you go Beal, then you go Nurkic and Allen. And it just hasn't worked out. The fit hasn't worked out. And now, you're going to have to trade KD in the summer because you don't have a lot of assets going forward.
You mentioned Matt Ishbia coming in as a new owner. This is like classic new owner syndrome. He's doing everything possible, going completely all in, trying to win now, and not really, as you said, negotiating that deal quite as much because it's KD. It's understandable. It really is. He's
Sure.
Kevin Durant, right?
Sure.
And I think even the Ayton deal, my understanding is Ayton and KD were, Booker and KD were not the biggest fans of Ayton. They didn't have full trust or faith in him to be that guy. So if your best players are saying that, yeah, Ayton has had some flaws. He's not a perfect player, very inconsistent. You did need to constantly push him to continue playing at a high level as Chris Paul did. I understand a lot of those decisions, but you are in this spot now. Do you sense that Ishbia is going to continue doubling, tripling down and trying to win? Or is there any sense that like, hey, maybe this is the final run here and then you pull the plug on everything this offseason?
We've had Matt on the show a few times. And a few months ago, he mentioned to us that they're not going to stay in the second apron. They can't. You can't get to the point where your picks are frozen and they move to the end of the draft. They're not going to get to that point. So this is it. Like, this is it. If they don't win this year, which they're not going to, they have no choice but to try to trade Durant. Now, in trading Durant, they want two things. They want young players back and assets. They want both. Now, Houston has all the Suns' picks. So it doesn't pay for the Suns to tank when Houston has their picks. So they're in a tough spot because if you want to trade KD and you don't trade him to Houston and you want to tank a little bit, you don't want to do it because Houston's going to end up with your pick. So you got to try to be competitive and build around Book. As long as Booker wants to stay, you can get back a couple young pieces and some future assets with the draft picks. I think they'll have a softer rebuild. I don't think they'll tank. But I don't think there's any question. The guy you have to move is Durant. Not because he's not a great player. It's because he can bring you back 2 or 3 young players and hopefully 2 first-round draft picks in the future.
That's without a doubt. Like, you have to try to trade KD. Obviously, prior to the deadline, it was reported that Minnesota went after him. They don't have the most assets necessarily. They do have Anthony Edwards with his relationship with KD. I think KD would really have to push and leverage his way to Minnesota for that to actually end up happening. With only 1 year left at his age, maybe he does have some leverage. That'd be the fear for Phoenix, is if KD does leverage his way to a team where they can't offer a ton of picks and young players.
I think I love the Minnesota roster. I do like the Minnesota roster.
So you like what they can offer?
I like what Minnesota, because they have size and they swept the Suns last year.
Yeah.
And we're looking at like Alexander Walker and like, wow, God, I'd love to have a guy like that. They've got size. Look, the Suns, after they got swept by Minnesota, Kevin, they identified 4 areas of concern. One was coaching. So they got rid of Vogel and they brought in Budenholzer. That's been a disaster. I've been so disappointed with Budenholzer. Like,
he might regret taking the job too, right? Do you think he regrets it as well?
I mean, he might. The Suns went after him years ago when he was in Atlanta. He had 1 year left on his deal, $5 million. He ended up taking the Milwaukee job. But the Suns met with him. James Jones, Robert Sarver met with him. But he was more interested in getting the Milwaukee job if he could coach Giannis. And he got that job. So the Suns, tried for him years ago. They fired Monty. Monty didn't get along with DeAndre Ayton. He didn't get along with Jay Crowder. Then you bring in Vogel. You fire Vogel after you bring in Bud. So far, it's been a disaster. It's just, to me, there's no fire, no passion. Why are you not playing Ryan Dunn? Why are you not playing Oso Iguodaro? What? Tyus Jones was a good. Remember Tyus Jones with Memphis? He was good. Ja Morant goes out. He was good. What happened? Like, why is Tyus Jones not a good player anymore? Plumlee was better than Eubanks. Why is Plumlee struggling so much? Devin Booker's having a bad year. Not even consideration for an all-star. This is a down year for Book. To me, why are so many players struggling under Mike Budenholzer? So they brought in Bud. They thought they needed a point guard. They bring in Tyus. They bring in Monty. They wanted better depth. They get Plumlee instead of Eubanks. They wanted youth and athleticism. They draft Ryan Dunn, Oso Iguodaro. They thought, and a lot of us did, that they were going to be a top 4 seed in the West with 50-plus wins because of the moves they made. It hasn't happened.
Hasn't happened, and it doesn't look like there's any chance of it ever happening again, because as you said, this is probably it. And then it's going to be reshaping the roster completely, and then it's going to be a matter of, does Book want to stay or not? Like, does he want to see it through? If you're Book, I think, like, let's say KD gets traded for like a nice return. There are some nice players on the team. There are some nice young players. Dunn is talented. Oso's talented. They did do the 1-for-3 first-round pick swap prior to the draft, so they'd have more picks. They wouldn't have to tank. Maybe he'd give it time, but I'm not convinced he'd give it a lot of time, because I just don't see the path to contention in the next 2, 3, 4 years after everything that's transpired the last 2, 3 years for Book.
It's the biggest question in Phoenix. Is Booker, he's never asked out. He's never wanted to leave. He's played on some real, you got me, from 2010 to 2020, the Suns had one winning season. One. Dragan Bender, Marquise Chris, Josh Jackson, Alex Len. You remember some of those failed lottery picks?
Oh, yeah. I was there in Phoenix during some of those years. I was there.
Oh, my God.
Interviewed Earl Watson and the whole pass regime, and Ryan McDonough and the bright future Suns.
3 games into a season, they fired Earl Watson. 3 games into the season, they lost 2 games by like 30. You're gone. So it was really bad. He was part of that. He was part of it when it was really bad. But then it got good. They got Ricky Rubio. And all of a sudden, they go to the bubble. They go 8-0. They have a good run in the bubble. Like, wow, okay, future's pretty bright. And then they get, and then they get rid of Rubio. And it was Rubio, Baines, and Oubre, who I thought really helped the Suns become relevant. I give all those guys credit. Aaron Baines, Kelly Oubre, Ricky Rubio helped the Suns become relevant again. And then you go make the trade for Chris Paul. We all thought they'd be a 6 seed. They go to the NBA Finals. They're up 2-0, and they lose. Then Chris hit a wall. He just hit a wall on his birthday against, I think it was Denver. He just struggled, and they decided we can't count on Chris being healthy. He got injured, the groin injury. He missed, he played the first 2 games of the playoffs and then missed the rest of that series. And then they went out and got Kevin Durant. But then he got hurt, and he only played in 8 games. And if you look at it now, after this year, it'll be 3 playoff seasons with Kevin Durant. 3, even if they make the playoffs this year. If you don't have any success, you got to move on. You have to move on. You have no choice. The biggest question really is Booker. Will Booker want to stay? Because if you traded, you would get more for Booker than you would Durant.
Oh, yeah. Way more.
So if you wanted to, you could trade Durant and Booker, completely start over, have a bunch of young players and draft picks. But again, unless you could make a trade with Houston, tanking doesn't do them any good because Houston has their picks.
Exactly. I mean, whether it's Booker or KD, if you're going to tank, one of them has to go to Houston, without a doubt. And I think for Houston, we'll see how their season finishes out. I don't think they're going to go very far in the postseason. I don't trust them. Too young. They have too many holes. But for Houston, I'd want Booker. To me, that'd be the number one guy that I'd want, probably, maybe league wide. Booker is probably number one who I'd want for Houston's roster with what they currently have. So we'll see how that transpires. But I think we both agree here, Gambo. The Suns aren't making the play. If they do, they just slip in as the 10. And that's just crazy. It's crazy with this roster.
Do you think Sacramento will do better in the final 25 games than Phoenix? Because if you do, then I don't think the Suns are going to make the play-in.
I mean, their schedule is easier than Phoenix's schedule. So, but like Phoenix has quote unquote more talent, higher end talent. Phoenix should be better, but they're not. They're not. So I think I lean Sacramento with their slight edge right now in the standings and their easier schedule than Phoenix. Because like I mentioned those games, Phoenix has a brutal schedule, man. Like, that's hard. A lot of those games.
There's a 10-game stretch. There's a 10-game stretch coming up where a lot of people are like, I don't know if they're going to win any of these games. Go with like 10 games or like, can they even win these? If you're struggling to beat San Antonio, struggling to beat Toronto, like, the question is, are the Suns going to play hard? Like Sacramento, probably going to play hard all the way through. San Antonio, going to play hard. The question is, are the Suns going to play hard in these final 25 games? They're wearing these guys out, Kevin. Durant's playing 40 minutes a game. Booker's playing 40 minutes a game. Like, back-to-back in these last two back-to-back Chicago and Toronto. Go look at the minutes that Booker, Beal, and Durant have played. They never blow anybody out. So every game comes down to the last couple of minutes. And they don't have a deep bench. So I'm concerned about the heavy volume minutes. Durant was terrible yesterday. He just wasn't good. He had one basket in the second half. He played the night before, and he played like 39 minutes. Can you continue to push Durant the way they're pushing him through the end of the season, or is the dam going to break?
What was his quote the other day? Like he said something along the lines of about the adversity they're facing. He had some quote after a game about it's all not always going to be. I'm paraphrasing completely, and I'm just forgetting it off the top of my head.
I don't remember the exact quote. After the San Antonio game, he was he was chirping with Chris. He was chirping it with Mike because he said get somebody in here that can guard. But I think it's the same thing. They got hot. We didn't make enough shots. Kevin's talked about adversity and fighting through it, but Beal has and Booker has too. The talk is the talk. They're not walking the walk. You can say whatever you want to say, and then you go lose to Toronto under a barrage of three-pointers when they're like the 20th best three-point shooting team. So I give Durant a lot of credit. Faces the media after every game, answers every question. I mean, truly, I've been here for 30 years in Phoenix, one of the great superstars. And he does answer every question. He never shies away from it. And again, he operates individually of the team. So it's a little bit different. You got to surround him with the right cast. And I think that's the question. Phoenix has to look at themselves in the mirror when this season is over and say, did we surround them with the right cast? But it'll be too late because you can't come back and run it back again. You just can't. You have to move on.
Dire times, Gambo. It was so fun just a few years ago. It was so fun. It was so fun.
Made it to the NBA Finals, and you had a good young team, and you had all your draft picks, and then they trade Ayton, they trade McHale, they trade Cam. People love that team too, Kevin. Mm-hmm. Fans loved that team. Fans don't love this team. They're very frustrated with this team because of the underachievement. The expectations were just so high, and they've underachieved.
What went from the bright future Suns to the bright now Suns to the bleak future Suns. Very sad.
Can you imagine Houston? Can you imagine Houston having their lottery pick this year and catching a break in the lottery? It'd be a disaster.
Oh my goodness. Be good radio. Gambo, thanks for joining me today, man.
Thank you. Thanks, Kev.
All right, up next on my questions keeping me up at night. Number 5, is Paolo Banchero actually good? And this is coming from someone I ranked Banchero number 1 in his draft class, ahead of Chet Holmgren, ahead of Jabari Smith. So I believe in Paolo. I love Paolo. I think the idea of Paolo is an all-NBA level player, a top 5 to 10 level player in the NBA. But he has not been good this year. He's not been good at all. And over this past week when Niang was talking trash with him, the clip went viral on social media. He's basically said to Paolo, keep shooting the mid-range and see how far that gets you. And like it's like really good trash talk in the sense that it is spot on with his style of play. 45% of his shots come from the mid-range, according to Cleaning the Glass. Shoots only 38% on those shots. And so Paolo, never been an efficient mid-range player, continues to shoot that ball more than he does anything else. His ball-stopping style, the lack of efficiency, the, okay playmaking, the okay defense. He's just a very player right now. And then you juxtapose him against Franz Wagner, and you look at their lineups, the Magic this season with Franz and Paolo, a little over even, minus 2.4 net rating with both of them on the floor. And then with Franz on the floor without Paolo, the Magic are outscoring teams by 10.8 points per 100 possessions. And with Paolo without Franz, look at the numbers. Their offensive rating drops by about 9. Their defensive rating is about 9 points worse. They get outscored by 8.2 points per 100 possessions with Paolo on the floor without Franz Wagner. Franz is the true engine of this Magic team. He is undeniably the better player right now. The better defender, the better playmaker, the better decision maker, the better shot maker, the better three-point shooter, off the dribble, off the catch, the better, more versatile player. Paolo, I think, needs to take a look in the mirror and figure out who he wants to be. And this mid-range guy, this low-efficiency mid-range guy is not it, man. I think he needs to really make some changes this offseason. And the flip side of this is that how much of this is their roster? They have poor spacing. Banchero's a downhill attacking guy. Maybe he's taking mid-range because there's not as many driving lanes, but that doesn't seem to be as much of an issue for Franz Wagner. And that's where I look at things and I'm like, Paolo's missing some pieces. But I want him to prove and continue ascending over the end of the season. That's where I have this question, like, is he actually good? Well, show it to me in the closing weeks of the season here. Number 6, is it worth holding on to hope with the Bucks? They get games this week against Houston on Tuesday, Denver on Thursday. They're on a little bit of a winning streak. No Bobby Portis because of his suspension. They've won 4 games in a row. Kuzma's looking awesome. He's not shooting the ball well, below 30% from 3 still, but the cutting, the movement, the connective playmaking ability, his defense has been excellent. He has completely flipped the switch ever since they got him. I mean, Kuzma this year was a disaster with the Wizards, but clearly he was playing down to the level of the situation there with the worst team in basketball. With the Bucks, he's flipped the switch defensively. He's turned it on. Opponents are having a hard time getting around him. He's showing his versatility with his size at 6'9", 6'10". He looks like a worthy bet for the Bucks, especially giving up a vet, a champion in Chris Middleton. And then Kevin Porter Jr., the creation off the bench, adding a lot, a new dimension to that Bucks team that they were otherwise lacking. I do think it's worth holding on to hope with the Bucks here as a potential champion. But when I talk about that, like holding on to hope, I mean as like a favorite, a team that can actually beat the Cavs or beat the Celtics. Is it worth holding on to hope there? And that's where I think some of these games they have coming up, we're going to get the answers with these upcoming games. They have Houston and Denver this week. Then they have some easy games. But then next month, middle of March, they have Cleveland, the Lakers, the Thunder, the Warriors, and then they have a West Coast road trip that starts there. Warriors, Lakers, Kings, Suns, Nuggets. This is the stretch of games in March. March is where we're going to get our answers with who the Bucks really are. So by April, I think we're going to have a really good idea at the actual chances the Bucks have as a serious contender. But right now, it's too hard to tell, but I'm optimistic about what we've seen so far. Number 7, do the post-deadline Cavaliers perform better versus Boston? This is one of the biggest questions in the league when you're talking about who's going to win the championship. The Cavs are 1-2 against the Celtics this season. They have not dominated in those games in the ways that they have a ton of other opponents. We saw earlier in the year, I believe it was the December game where the Celtics attacked Garland over and over. Undeniably, Garland and Mitchell are some holes on the Cavs defense that the Celtics are going to attack if they face off in a series. But this Friday, they face off for the 4th and final time during the regular season. This will be the last time unless they face off again in the Eastern Conference Finals in late May. The 4th game, but the first game in which we're going to see the Cavaliers with their deadline acquisition, DeAndre Hunter. They get Okoro back, Dean Wade's back, Ty Jerome is playing a bigger role because they traded away LeVert. The Cavs are the same but different. And so they're bigger, they feel more complete, they feel like they should match up better against Boston. That's what I'm going to be watching on Friday. We're going to get an answer on Friday. How different do the Cavaliers look? Do they look better equipped to handle the Celtics playing what Joe Mazzulla calls a killer whale offense? They hunt seals. They go after the weak spot. Are they better able to handle what Boston's going to be throwing at them? Up next, let's bring on my buddy CP the Franchise from over on Knicks Fan TV to answer my question about the Knicks. And now joining me from Knicks Fan TV to talk about the Knicks, CP the Franchise. What's up, CP?
Kev, always good to be on with you, man, and the right time to reconvene.
It absolutely is. And so, the theme of this podcast is the big questions on my mind down the final stretch of the season. And with the Knicks, some news this week is really on my mind. Mitchell Robinson could be making his return. So the question, CP, is how does Mitchell Robinson transform the Knicks? Because I feel like without him, they're more pretenders than contenders. We've just seen the way Boston has completely outplayed them in each game this season. But can Mitchell Robinson make the Knicks feel complete, giving them too big ability? What do you expect from Mitchell Robinson there? And do you think he can help increase their finals odds?
I think he could definitely help. I mean, when you look at the state of this Knicks defense, how it's gone down the tubes in this Tom Thibodeau era, it's on the Karl Anthony Towns at the 5 situation, man. I mean, not just Mitchell Robinson's absence, but Isaiah Hartenstein's absence was major for this Knicks team and their defense. And you look at the Celtics game as an example. I mean, I think the stat was that they put Karl Anthony Towns in 50 pick and roll situations, and they've been exposing him, whether it's in the drop, which they're the best at, and Tibbs went to 46% of the time in that game, or if he's at the level, or even when they pre-switch, the Celtics still found a way to get him involved in secondary action. So he's the target that these teams are going after. I think Mitchell Robinson is going to be able to help in that area, being able to protect the rim and disrupt rhythm, keep guys from just waltzing into the paint, being a deterrent out there on the perimeter. Even though that's not his best strength as he's gotten older in the league, he still can't cover a guy like a Porzingis very well, but he'll do a much better job of Karl Anthony Towns, and at the very least keep his hands up. And so having that big presence for the Knicks is going to help, not just defensively in terms of deterring, but also rebounding on the defensive side, and then offensive rebounding. In these games, and we've talked about, the Knicks have not maintained their three-point percentage as of late. So if they're going to be missing shots, you need somebody out there that's going to help gobble up some rebounds, get this team some second chance opportunities. And that's what a healthy Mitchell Robinson should be able to bring to this team.
Yeah, so the Knicks this season, 0-3 against the Celtics, 0-2 against the Cavaliers. I lose on Friday against Cleveland, 142-105, complete blowout on the road. Lose 118-105 against the Celtics on Sunday. I think those two games did expose the Knicks as more. They're not a serious contender as currently constructed, which is why Mitchell Robinson, as you said, these teams are attacking Brunson and Towns in pick and roll, going at Towns no matter where he is on the floor. That's where I think about Minnesota last season. You have Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, or Gobert and Naz Reid, or Towns and Naz Reid. They had three different lineup front court combinations they played all the time. They didn't go with one big all that often because of the amount of front court flexibility they had. But Cat playing the four next to Rudy Gobert is by far the best Cat has ever looked on defense in his entire career. And it's been a career in which sometimes, like, remember the old, can't play Cantor thing? Sometimes it was like can't play Cat, where it's just like attacked over and over and over again. I just can't help but wonder if maybe, we're almost in March at this point. It's not often teams transform this late in the season, but maybe this is what has to happen. Like, maybe you do have to transform after the lack of success against these true contenders in the East. And maybe having Mitchell Robinson at the 5 and Karl Anthony Towns at the 4 for long stretches is what can help against some of these teams. But do you think that would actually be enough? Like, do you think it would actually change things against a Cleveland, against a Boston, having the ability to go with two bigs? Or is it the same thing where instead of going at Cat and pick and roll, then they're just trying to get him on a switch on the perimeter and just trying to go at him that way?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what these elite coaches like Kenny Atkinson and Joe Mazzulla are going to try to do. I mean, as I stated in that game against Boston, even when the Knicks tried to counter, Mazzulla had his guys ready for another counter to get their advantages, and it becomes demoralizing. And even when this team was composed to meet the expectations of a championship contender and to be able to see Boston, see the Cleveland Cavaliers, it's been demoralizing to see that they're just not on that level yet. Yeah, you go into opening night against Boston and you tip your cap, you say, hey, those are the champs. It was their night. We'll let the Knicks get some chemistry and get it together. Well, they've gotten it together now, and it's still the same result, maybe even worse. And the Towns thing is interesting because, yes, he has a lot of limitations, but how about the Knicks' transition defense, Kevin? I mean, their transition defense has been woeful from the beginning of the season straight through. They consistently don't target their guys, don't communicate, and whether it's off of a live rebound or even after a made basket, these guys aren't covering. Wingstop has been disappointing. These are the guys that you brought in to limit. You're not going to stop Tatum and Brown, but to limit those guys. And they've been woeful. So I think the presence of Mitchell Robinson is going to be part of the evaluation period for these remaining 20-plus games for Leon Rose and company to see, okay, if we pair him up with Towns, does he give us that advantage? Do we have an extra option that we can go to in terms of the two big lineups? Or do we need to take Karl Anthony Towns out completely in certain situations that let Mitchell Robinson roam as the sole 5, maybe keep OG Anunoby as the 4, Josh Hart as the 4, and go from there because it's been so woeful. So this is going to be the litmus test here, these remaining 20 or so games and into the playoffs, to see, is Mitchell Robinson what his value is to this team, and can he help elevate this team defense? Because right now they're lost.
Yeah, they're absolutely lost on defense right now. And, for Mitchell Robinson coming back now, he's more of a 25-minute per game guy. I mean, and coming back from injury in the middle of March, I'm sure he'll be eased in. But if by the playoffs they're able to get him to 25 minutes per game, that feels vital to me, because then you get him with minutes with Cat, and then you have minutes where he's the lone big on the floor. And as you said, like, it changes the style. Rim running, screen hard rolls with Brunson or whoever the ball handler is, changes the complexion of the team versus Cat, who can either roll, short roll, or pick and pop. Obviously, it's his primary thing, that he would do with Brunson in a two-man game action. But with Mitchell Robinson, it just feels like, you look at deadline acquisitions, the trades that were made, then the injured guys that came back. Chet Holmgren, massive for Oklahoma City, of course, going back to OKC after his absence. Mitchell Robinson, a little after the deadline, but pretty massive for them. Who, if Mitchell Robinson starts, is it Josh Hart that moves to the bench and has like a big, six-man role, big energy off the bench? Or do you think, there's any reason to move somebody else to the bench? Do you think Bridges would accept that? Does it make any sense to even move him to the bench? I'm just curious about where you think Tibbs is going to take this once Robinson is back.
I think given the need for a minute's restriction or limitation, they're going to start to bring him off the bench slowly. Do they move to ultimately start him as the season ends and you head into the postseason? That's certainly a possibility, depending on how they match up. I think Detroit right now seems to be in that 6th seed, but we'll see how things match up in the playoffs. But if they did make a move or move someone from the starter to the bench, Josh Hart would be the most likely candidate, because he's shown the ability to play off the bench, be a starter. He's their most versatile player. A good playmaker for that second unit. That
if he moves to the bench, is he still going to play 40 minutes a game?
he still might. No, Tom Thibodeau, man. I mean, from the minute he got here, he's been closing games. So, but I think if you're looking for a spark for that second unit, someone with experience that can playmate, that can make the right decisions, I think that's what that second unit has been missing. A little bit more size, just in terms of girth. I think Josh Hart would be the right candidate to come off the bench there.
What's the temperature of Knicks fans right now? Are they concerned? Yeah. Is there belief in this team that they can make a run all the way to the finals and actually win it?
No, there's full set panic in the fan base right now. Full set panic. They, first off, they want to send the coach. They want to pack the coach's bags. They think this is squarely on Tibbs. They feel like he's lost the locker room. I think it's fair to question. For sure. Do I see the Knicks making a knee-jerk firing of the coach right now before the playoffs? No, I don't see that. But this is where the fan base is. When they see that, they are not only not beating Cleveland and Boston and OKC, they're getting completely washed in these early in these games. By the first half, these games are done. Even though they made a valiant effort and Brunson was Brunson, he was great, and they cut the lead down to 4. You still know that Boston's going to come back with a wave, and that's what they did. They sat Brunson with 7-point deficit in the 4th, and before you know it, it's back up to 14, just like that. So I think the fan base is definitely demoralized. There's still a lot of season left to be played, but it's clear that this team is just not ready for the big show.
If by, let's just say, win a first-round series regardless of opponent, second-round series against Boston or Cleveland, depending on the seeding, probably Boston in the second round. If at that point Knicks fans are feeling confident, what changed between now and that point?
They have to get the defense together. It's the defense, and also finding the right combinations offensively that these teams cannot exploit or have a more difficult time of exploiting. Right now, you're seeing a lot of lineups. One of the issues in the Boston game is one of the issues that they continue to have when they play Josh Hart in those starting lineups is he's the guy that when opposing defenses want to take something away, they say, all right, we're going to shadow Towns, we'll shadow Brunson, and Josh Hart, we're going to let you decide when you want to take your threes, because that's been part of the issue. His confidence in taking those threes, it wanes. Sometimes you'll step into it and knock it down. In the playoffs last year, he was at four and a half threes a game on 37%. He was good. On a night like yesterday, when they're daring you to shoot, you have to go and step into it and make them pay. You got to let it fly. And then it compounds the issue. Tibbs will compound the issue by playing Hart and Precious Achiuwa in the lineup. So now you're not creating offense. You're not creating offense from your defense being disruptive. You're not disruptive. You're soft on the defensive end. Then they get you in the half court and you're playing basically 3-on-5. It's a very difficult situation there. So yes, they need to get their defense together, but they have to find more offense in the half court where they can create the advantage and not let the defense dictate what's going on.
It's worrisome when the Knicks defense is garbage and there's also concerns about offense with the lineups.
Yeah, it's like I said, when they're shooting well, it looks great. When Hart's getting out in transition, it looks great. When OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges are out there disrupting passing lanes, getting steals, and you can get easy buckets, it looks good. But when you lock them down in the half court, their lack of ball handlers and their lack of shot creators gets exposed.
And that's the big difference compared to Boston. Like you juxtapose it against Boston. It's like, yes, they have Tatum and Brown, but they also have Drew Holiday. They also have Derek White. They also have Kristaps Porzingis, one of the best, most efficient post players in basketball. Like even Al Horford at 50 years old, he can handle the ball on the perimeter and run a dribble handoff. They have Peyton Pritchard, who's one of the most efficient pick and roll ball handlers this entire season. They have attack points from literally everybody on the floor at all times, regardless of the configuration. That's why Boston's on another level. Cleveland has a lot of attack points as well. You have Mitchell and Garland as your engines, but DeAndre Hunter can handle a bit. Evan Mobley has developed. Even Jared Allen, throw him the ball on the short roll, he can dribble and finish, dribble and kick it out on a short roll opportunity. Mitchell Robinson, more of like a catch and finish guy, right? Like there's just not many attack points with the Knicks. And that's where you look at Mikal Bridges and it's like, damn, like you hope that he could have been closer to what you thought he would be, giving up as many picks as you did. I know he can shoot off the dribble, but it feels like Mikal Bridges, his role in this offense is not as amplified as perhaps I thought it would be as a secondary creator next to Brunson. And I'm a little bit surprised that Tibbs hasn't put Bridges more on ball, more in those creation situations when we saw he can do that in Brooklyn. Considering the spot up shooting, it's still been way up and down throughout the year. So I'm a little bit surprised there, but that's Tibbs. Like Tibbs, he plays his guys who he trusts for 40 minutes a game. He runs Brunson into the ground because Brunson's dominant. Why would you not? He's one of the 10 to 15 best players in basketball right now this season. So I get it, but at the same time, it's like, damn, I wish they could get even more out of Bridges to have more variety in their half-court offense.
It's been disappointing. You saw it in the Christmas Day game when he went off against the Spurs, when he has the ball in his hands and good things happen. And so it falls on Tibbs to create more opportunities for him, to create optimal rotations and lineups that can feature Mikal Bridges. But also, when he's playing, and this is the thing, when you're in New York, this is a different beast. This isn't Brooklyn. This isn't Phoenix. When you're attacking the basket and you're fading away from contact all the time and not hitting, the Knicks fans are going to take you to task, man. The guy does not get to the free throw line. He doesn't get rebounds. That's not New York brand of ball. You have that, and I said this on my post-game show after the Boston game. Even those guys weren't the best finishers, Julius Randle, RJ Barrett, they were going to the cup. That was one thing about those guys, especially RJ Barrett. That was his bread and butter because his jumper wasn't fluid. He's going to the basket. He's drawing contact. He's getting to the free throw line. Mikal Bridges, every time he breaks out on a defender and he's driving into the paint, he's going backwards.
Every time.
We're grit and grind here in New York, man. You can't do that, especially if you're not getting the intangibles either. So it's been a rough go, and it's been a rough sell in terms of this trade package to the fan base. A lot of these guys are sour on the Mikal Bridges trade.
Understandably so. And I think for the Knicks, the minutes aspect with Tibbs, I know, the other night, Deuce McBride plays almost 30 minutes. It wasn't a great game for him offensively against Boston. But we talk about like the attack points for the Knicks. They have Payne. He plays 10 minutes against Boston. They have Deuce, who plays inconsistent minutes. They do have some other guards. It's just those guys are also small. So I think Tibbs, has his flaws as a coach. But at the same time, as great as this front office has been in building this thing out, the Bridges deal does look like it may have been a mistake. The other attackers that they have next to Brunson and Cat as the primary source of your offense, they just don't have a lot of those guys. So I think it's shared blame for the Knicks, and then the players themselves. Like, it's the Knicks gave up a ton for Bridges, but nobody could have seen like his shot entering the season the way it looked. Nobody could have seen Bridges with a broken jumper. Like, I just don't think anybody could have predicted him having to fix that and then still be a worse shooter than he has been in any other year in his career. So, like, there's shared blame across the roster, and that's where it's like you look at them. I feel like I don't view them as a contender. I don't, unless Mitchell Robinson changes everything. And that's what I'm going to be watching for the remainder of this year, man. Are you holding on any hope, CP, for a Knicks title?
Always, man. Always. I've been doing it for 40 years, man. I'm 40. I've been doing it for 40 years. So I'm always holding out that hope. But it's, as you said, Leon Rose, they allowed Tibbs to lean in on his trust issues by not giving him an adequate bench. We know what campaign is. We know what Landry Shamet is. Hey, listen, he had them out there in the fourth quarter in that game down by 7 with Brunson on the bench, and fans are like, man, why are they resting Brunson? Well, the lead ballooned back up to 14. And so Deuce McBride, I want to see him playing more. He went 1 for 7 in that game. Precious Achiuwa, non-factor. So, there's only so much that these guys can do. But then you see the wear and tear on these guys. Karl Anthony Towns, knee, had no business going back into that game or even volunteering to go back into that game.
Dude, what the heck was that?
That was a catastrophe waiting to happen.
Why was he back out there?
I think he's trying to, disprove that whole soft thing. I think he was trying to prove something, but it was bad on him and Tibbs. Josh Hart dealing with a chronic knee injury. OG Anunoby does not look good with his return from the foot injury and does not have confidence. They've got to look to sign maybe a TJ Warren, a Chuma Okeke in the buyout market and play those guys.
They're not fixing anything, though, unfortunately.
They're not fixing anything, KO, but like...
Eat minutes.
Either you got to get it, like call it innings eater on the baseball terms. They need minutes eaters right now because these guys are not going to get to April, especially with this bench being, lackluster, man. The bench is what they are.
And you're saying not get to April. They didn't get to May last year.
They didn't get to May last year.
They fell apart. They get injured and it all falls apart. It feels like we're heading towards that again. CP, I hope things change. I hope Mitchell Robinson changes everything. I hope he makes the Knicks feel complete because I want to see the two bigs. So we'll see what happens once he comes back. Thank you for joining me today, man.
Hey, anytime, man. Always appreciate the time, KO.
All right, up next on my questions keeping me up at night, number 9. Who's going to start tanking? Who's going to start? This draft's loaded. I don't know how many of you guys watching this video, NBA fans that are also following the draft, but this draft is loaded, man. Cooper Flagg locked in as the number 1 prospect. Dylan Harper, watch his 2 most recent games for Rutgers. 6'6" point guard, downhill attacker, super versatile. When his shooting is falling, he looks like a guy that could maybe in redrafts 5 years from now be the number 1 guy. And so Dylan Harper's clearly the number 2. In my opinion, I have Cooper clearly ahead of him, a tier above, because of the safety in drafting Cooper. There's no holes in Cooper Flagg's game. Dylan Harper, the shooting is a question. He's close to 30% on dribble jumpers from mid-range and from 3. Not a great spot-up guy, but he has these games where you see the shot fall, these stretches where the shot falls, and he looks like a number 1 worthy pick. So you have 2 guys at the top. And then after that, you want a 6'9" shot maker in the spirit of Michael Porter Jr.? Dylan Harper's teammate Ace Bailey. You want to take a gamble on a 7-footer who might be Mo Bamba, but could also be Rudy Gobert? Here's Malawach from Duke, Flagg's teammate. You want a sharpshooting 2-guard? Here's VJ Edgecombe from Baylor. Like up and down the middle of the lottery, there's a ton of guys that are gonna be good NBA players, maybe great NBA players. This draft is deep in the lottery. And so even if you end up with a number 3 or number 4 pick, you're going to have a good pick here. Now, I wonder if the reason why we're seeing teams like the Jazz not tank, or the Raptors trade for Ingram, or the Pelicans, they have Zion out there. He's playing really well. These teams might not feel much incentive to tank because the lottery is so deep with talent and because the odds are flat. And so there aren't a lot of teams that are actually incentivized to tank. Had Gamble on the podcast earlier talking about the Suns. They don't have their first round pick. There's not incentive to tank out of the play-in or the playoffs. The Sixers, we'll talk about them in a minute. They have a top 6 protected first, or it goes to OKC. They have incentive to tank. The Kings, top 12 protected. I don't think they're going to be tanking, but they would have incentive to do it. And same with the Heat in the Eastern Conference, top 14 protected. I can't see them tanking, but there is incentive because of the protections on their picks. There's just not a lot of teams that are tanking right now. It feels like even the bottom, besides the Wizards, everybody's trying to compete. Raptors beat the Suns. The Hornets are competing in games or trying to compete as bad as they are. I mean, they get absolutely slaughtered by the Blazers the other night. They weren't very competitive in that game, but they did have a win against the Lakers right out of the All-Star break. So these teams are competing. I just wonder when we're going to hit a point that you see Lauri Markkanen out for the next 5 weeks, or you see these announcements like from the Spurs, if they're going to shut down like a Castle, something like that. Like, are these teams at some point going to go full on, I'm tanking, we're out of this? The team that might actually do that is the Sixers. So let's bring on Spike Eskin to answer the question. Is the Joel Embiid era over in Philadelphia?
The wild thing is, so they started 3-14. Even if you wipe that 3-14 off of their record, they're still under 500 this year. Mike mentioned on the podcast the other day, which is like, okay, take away the whole bad start, and they've lost 8 in a row, 7 in a row, and that a lot of them have been with those 3 guys. So yeah, this season is certainly over, and then even like more catastrophic, it seems like it's entirely possible this like era or whatever is over. So there's not a lot of clarity, like you said, with Embiid. There's never been a lot of clarity. I know people like to, and I understand why they would blame the team for that, but it's been the same way under every leadership for the Sixers while Embiid's been there. That comes from Embiid. Embiid doesn't like public discussion of his injuries, doesn't like clarity on that, and I think they sort of have to follow that. So yeah, a lot of things coming to an end all at once, it seems like.
Well, he doesn't like talking about it, but he's brought it up a couple times. Like, he had the quote on, I think it was Thursday after the Boston game, and he's like, the way I'm playing a year ago, it's not the way I'm playing now, and no excuses, but I probably need to fix the problem to get back to the level. But in your story on Rice to Ricky Sanchez, you follow up saying that, and you're like, there is no fix. Right. There is none.
There isn't one. I think he, like I mentioned, it's complicated. I am sympathetic toward him because I'm because he's human, B, because I'm a fan of his, C, because he was so great in his prime here. So I want to be sympathetic toward what he's going through, but I'm also frustrated because when he says things like he did, he presents a different version of what is true, and what is real. The reality is, most likely, when he tore his meniscus again, when Kuminga fell on his knee, that we were in for this no matter what. So he had that surgery, and he keeps talking about a surgery. There isn't a surgery that's going to fix this. There are certainly therapies that they can try, and there are sort of more out of left field surgeries. People keep mentioning the Lonzo meniscal replacement. It is my understanding that it's not an option for Embiid. I think possibly because of his size. And let's be honest, we're not even sure how that's going to hold up for Lonzo at this point, after a year and a half off. He's playing, but we don't know, and he's in far better shape and not nearly as big as Embiid. So I think there are things they can try, but the best option was always to given what his knee looked like and the situation he was in and sort of like the arthritic condition he had because of the meniscal, the 2 surgeries he had that removed part of the meniscus, was that his body just sort of adjusts and he doesn't have as much swelling, and they manage it when they have it. But his body has not adjusted. And every time he's tried to play within 2 or 3 games, they've had swelling again. So I don't know that there is, maybe one of these things works. I don't know. The more sort of out of left field, close your eyes, swing, and hope you hit a home run sort of things. But there isn't like a surgery he could have had before the year that would fix it. And there isn't a surgery now that will fix it. And I think when he says things like that, it almost screams to me like he is trying to convince himself that that he can just wake up one day and it'll be fixed, rather than the reality of what could actually happen.
And that's especially the scary part here. Because if you're talking about Lonzo surgeries, Lonzo missed 2 years.
Right.
And he's not the same guy that he was prior to the absence that he had. Defensively, he doesn't move the same way, doesn't make the impact when the Bulls had him and Caruso together and they're wreaking havoc as a duo. Offensively, he's not performing anywhere nearly as well. Can't get to the basket as much as they ever did that. Lonzo's just not the same guy. And so if that's the type of surgery you're talking about for Joel Embiid, a guy who already, just not the same impact player this year. He's had his moments where he looks like MVP level Joel Embiid, the guy that gives you hope of making a deep playoff run. But for the most part, do you agree with that assessment that even in the games where he has played, it's just nowhere near or as frequent as it was, prior to all of this madness?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it's hard to tell, and it's impossible for us to know how much of that is his lack of trust in the knee, how much is pain, how much is just sort of a lack of mobility, and how much is like his disappointment that he is not able to be who he was, right? So I sort of have been thinking about this, and maybe there is a world in which he is skilled enough, right? He's one of the most skilled basketball players I've ever seen in my entire life. So he's skilled enough that even if he were 70% physically of what he were before, he can still be a plus player in the NBA. Can't be one of the 5 best players, can't do any of that, but is there a world in which he could be an effective NBA player if he's not trying to do all those things that he used to do, right? I think that's possible, I guess, but that would also take a mental buy-in from him as, hey, offense is not going through me anymore. Hey, I can't get fouled every time I want to. Hey, I can't make up this ground on this defensive rotation because I simply don't have it in me anymore. But these are decisions that I think players usually make in their mid-30s, where age has caught up to them, and he's not there, and he's never been the hardest worker in the world, and he's never been a guy totally willing to bend for. He always wants the offense going through him. So I don't know what the future is, right? I don't think he's going to play again this year for sure, but trying to guess how they maneuver around this is really tough, because if there isn't a market for him and they decide they don't want to build around him anymore, do you pay 2 draft picks to get off of him? Is that the smartest thing to do when you're trying to rebuild a roster, around young players, giving up draft picks just to get off his contract? I have no idea. Idea.
Dude, I can't fathom doing that. I just wouldn't want to do that. I'd want to at least give it another year with Joel before I resort to attaching draft picks to him. I still think, like you talk about, I think that you're spot on there. With Philly this year, they add Paul George. Jared McCain's looking like the rookie of the year. Some of their role players are playing really well. Like Maxi's still playing at a high level as well. So it's like you still have like a supporting cast that makes sense around MVP level Joel Embiid. So the 70% version of him that you're talking about, this theoretical version of Embiid, I still think another team could see, value in taking a swing at that. The problem is the length of his contract remaining. And the value of that contract. If you're paying for 70% of Embiid, that's not the type of money he should be making, if that's all you're going to get out of him, and he's still going to have durability concerns moving forward. So for Philly, this season's over for sure. I think you're right that it wouldn't surprise anybody if this week we hear Joel Embiid shut down for the remainder of the season, because Philadelphia at this point, they've lost 7 in a row as of our recording on Monday morning right now. They have the game on Monday night against the Bulls. We'll see what happens there. It doesn't change the fact that this team is sliding really, really hard here in a draft in which their first round pick is top 6 protected. Otherwise, it goes to Oklahoma City. Right now, they're 2.5 games back from Toronto for the 5th best odds to keep that pick and move into the top 4. And for Philly, man, it feels like if they continue the Joel Embiid era into next season, maybe it ends up a blessing in disguise that, you get this high draft pick and you're able to reshuffle things. You're laughing. You're like, no, there are no blessings. Do you have zero hope for this era?
No, boy, it's tough. I think maybe I'm too close to it, right? I think maybe you have better perspective on it than I do because I'm so in the middle of it. I just would bet, the chances of anybody winning a championship are more not likely than likely, right? Once we get past that. So, and then once you get into you're not one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the league, okay, then it gets to 2%, 1%, and we're percentage chances of that. I think given his lack of value at the moment, Embiid, right? We would think trade-wise, given they already have Paul George under contract, given that they, Maxey and McCain will be here next year, and that'll be part of what you're doing moving forward anyway, I would imagine, is that I would just try again at the beginning of next year, see what the Embiid situation is, try it again at the beginning of next year, and if it doesn't work, then you cut bait then. I think the even bigger question is, if you're doing that or you're saddled with it, do you look at saying, well, Tyrese Maxey's already on a giant contract? If we're going to rebuild, that's your most valuable piece to rebuild. I'm not saying to do it again. I'm just saying your mind starts going, well, we're going to rebuild around 2 small guards. One of them at best, Maxey's at best, could he get to the 12th best player in the league? Maybe. I don't know. So I don't know. And you're already hamstrung from a salary perspective anyway. So I think given all that, as big a question as that is, you probably, if you can figure out a way to get Embiid to a place where you think it's worth a try at the beginning of next year, I think you probably give it until the trade deadline next year.
I think it would be an easier answer to say, oh yeah, let's give it a try next season if Paul George didn't look like Tobias Harris. He's playing like Paul Harris right now. Yeah. That's what I feel like when I'm watching him. It's Paul Harris out there.
He's a tough one. Simultaneously has been incredibly disappointing, but also before the finger thing happened, looked pretty much as I expected this year. So I think on a good team, Paul George would be a good player. I don't think Paul George is the guy who's going to dig deep and, save the season when
playing
Embiid goes
down
out.
To the level. That's what you're thinking with him.
Yeah.
Okay.
I personally don't see physically. He settles, but he's always he settles for step backs. He's always kind of settled, right? And he's always sort of gone with the flow. He's been, when the team was actually a real team, maybe 2 months ago, he looked like a big positive on defense. He's a much better shooter off the catch than Tobias ever was, right? So I think on a good team, he would be a good player. I think I just sort of, I'm not giving anybody an excuse. I'm not giving Nick Nurse an excuse. I'm not giving Paul George an excuse. I feel like a lot of what is happening with the Sixers this year is downstream of the Embiid issue, and that you have everybody who jumped into this thinking that he was the sun and he was the centerpiece. And not only is he not there, but sometimes he's there and sometimes he's not. And he's saying he needs surgery, but the team's saying he doesn't. And he might play one night and he might not play one night. And if he plays, then they run the offense one way. If he doesn't play, then what are you doing? And I think that they are probably to an extent checked out on this season because of all of that. So I don't perceive Paul George looking as bad as the numbers or the highlights have shown. And I think if they wanted to trade him, I would guess they could at least get neutral value, if not maybe slightly plus value out of it.
Is the worst thing that can happen this season is they accidentally get into the play-in. Still only a game and a half back from the 10th spot right now.
Crazy.
Is that the worst result?
Dude, they're 20-36. They've lost 7 in a row, and they lose no ground on the play-in, on the 10 seed. They never lose any ground. They're perpetually a game behind in the 10 seed. And I do think if Embiid shuts it down and Paul George shuts it down and all these other guys who are fighting for their NBA lives, Quentin Grimes, Justin Edwards, they all play hard. Yabusele. I think there's a world where, they could even get a little bit better. I am very sort of it will go how it goes with the playoffs. I would prefer they didn't make it, I guess. I think I think if they get to the 5 spot in the tanking thing, they have a 64% chance of keeping their pick, which is, I'd take that. I think that's a better chance than beating the Cavs in a 7-game series, if they get into the play-in and they win, for Christ's sake. So I would take that, but I'm not going to cheer against them. I think if they end up, they get there, it'll be funny, I guess, but I don't think it's good for them to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, it's about like you said, around a 64% chance if they get the 5 spot, and it's closer to 45%, so under 50% if they stay in the 6th spot because of that top 6 protected pick to OKC. And that pick, it is interesting when you do think about like the years to come for Philly, because that pick next year becomes top 4 protected. It's also top 4 protected in 2027. But if they don't, let's say they blow it up and next year they also get a top 4 pick, that would extinguish the pick that they owe to Brooklyn. They owe a future first round pick to Brooklyn that's set Harden to convey to 2 years after they in theory convey a pick to OKC. A pick is supposed to convey to Brooklyn, but if it doesn't convey it this year or next year, then the pick that goes to Brooklyn is only a 2nd round pick. All very confusing. Yeah. But for Philly, I mean, there is that path of like just saying, screw it, pull the plug on everything, get a haul for Maxey, get what we can for Embiid, get what we can for George, and go that route. But ultimately, I still think, I mean, I'd so normally be on the blow it up path for so many of these teams. But for Philly, I still feel like you gotta roll the ball out there one more time next season. Redo things this year, bring back some of your role guys. Maybe you decide to keep Quentin Grimes. Maybe he plays himself into like a guy that you view as a keeper this season. He's had some moments. We've seen Quentin Grimes have moments from going back to when he was with the Knicks and Pistons, and this year with Dallas, and now with Philly. He's had moments. So for Philly, maybe they reshuffle things and, next season they come back and, there's hope again, but I just can't see the blow it up path for them yet, unless there's like a over the top offer for Embiid that you just can't say no to. You can't bypass the opportunity.
Yeah, I think given his like I said, given his lack of value, I would perceive, I think their best option is still probably to try it again next year. But I can tell you that and I don't think they'll operate based on this. Well, I know Morey wouldn't operate based on this. I don't know if ownership would. People are exhausted. Even the beginning of this year when there was a lot of hope, I think my gut would be like they've had probably more ticket issues than they've had previously over the last 2 or 3 years. And I don't know what the public is going to react to if they go, we're going to get Joel ready again, and this Paul George is making $55 million, who scores 12 points a game. He's going to be a different guy, and we're just going to try it again. It might be their best option on the court. I don't know what the public will tolerate at this point, too, And I think it makes me feel bad because Embiid gets a lot of vitriol and people are mad. I do think he is he should be held accountable for lack of attention to his body, he's disappeared in the playoffs in 2 particular series, the Miami one with Harden and the Celtics one with Harden. But all that said, even if those things never happened, his body probably would have failed him anyway. And to me, he was the most talented Sixer I've ever seen in my life. And at his best, in the conversation for 3 consecutive MVPs, if he hadn't gotten hurt last season, he was probably the front runner again. He was averaging like 36 and 12. I'm just very sad that it is at this point with him. So I don't know what the public will tolerate with him anymore and them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is sad. And you had a line in your article that you said it's kind of heartbreaking to watch a giant, formerly a destroyer of worlds, realize he's mortal, just like the rest of us. And that is part of it here. He's going to continue getting targeted. He's going to continue getting blamed for the lack of conditioning, for the past playoff disappointments. All that's true. But it doesn't change the fact that this dude was dominant just a year ago. And now it's in this place. There is a sadness in there with Philadelphia. I mean, I thought this season they had a chance. It felt like the roster made complete sense, and his body's just failed him. And in some ways, like we kind of years ago, the way it started with Embiid missing time at the beginning of his career, some of the injuries along the way, in a way, it feels like this was inevitable, but you still held on that hope with the way he continued ascending every single year, becoming an MVP, becoming one of the best players in the world. Like you said, most talented Sixer you've ever seen. Obviously, Allen Iverson being up there as well, but Embiid's defense puts him over the top.
Yes.
And that's where it's just like, damn, like it is just a continuation of what it's always been. There's not a light at the end of the tunnel, unless there is. Maybe there is next season, but it just doesn't feel like it.
Well, then the thing you said about the offseason is right. I would love to be mad at Morey. I would love to be, but I thought Caleb Martin was a good signing. I was glad they brought Oubre back. Yabusele ended up working out. Jared McCain was like...
Nailed it.
Nailed it with the 21st pick. The guy was on his way to being Rookie of the Year.
Maxey, the picks from past years have worked out. I mean, like he's done a good job building it around.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with the Eric Gordon signing. Like these are just minimums you throw around all over the place. I was optimistic, like cautiously optimistic about this year. So yeah, what a disaster, man! It's so bad. It's so bad.
Hey, at least the Eagles won the Super Bowl.
Yes. Well, we keep coming back to that, right? We had on one of our podcasts, I think 2 or 3 pods ago, we had our producer pop up every 8 minutes or so and just remind us that the Eagles won the Super Bowl because the podcast was getting too dark. So at least we have that. At least we have that.
Where can people find your stuff, Spike?
RiceRickySanchez.com. You can find all of our great writers and our podcasts, Mike O'Connor and Andrew Underberger. And,
the best O'Connor.
What's that? The best O'Connor. Yeah, Dan Olinger. And then the radio show, WIP with Ike Reese and Jack Fritz every day from 2 to 6. You can find the podcast wherever you get them. So thank you,
Spike. Appreciate it, man. Thank you. Have a good day. Thanks to my 3 guests, CP, Gambo, and Spike, for joining me on today's podcast to talk about the big questions on my mind. We got a lot coming up down the final stretch of the season. Can't wait to have it all. Be sure to subscribe to the Kevin O'Connor podcast if you've not done that already. It really does help us out if you give us a 5-star rating. Thanks to Mike and Stone for joining me. Have a good rest of your week.